What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson. I hope your holiday's going well. I guess I'm trying to do this holiday schedule slightly differently. I'm supposed to be doing these for now at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and I've been moving it up a little bit to 2 p.m. Eastern time. So this is like 8 a.m. New Zealand time. But this is sort of a dumpster fire. I guess you can call these dumpster fire episodes where we check in on the dumpster fire. That is world politics. And I don't know, I'm going to do it as much as I can. The streaming is fun. And if you want to support the show, well, I cannot monetize the Twitch channel yet. That'll come. It is not this day. I got to get my followers up. But in the meantime, if you want to support the show, un-diplomatic.com, un-diplomatic.com. That's, of course, where the newsletter is, where I do my writing. I just had a piece today, like I just published like 30 minutes ago, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And then I have to, of course, flog my forthcoming book, The Rivalry Peril. Again, it's going to look way better than this because it's going to be fancy book cover shit, and it's not going to have this blue stuff, and it'll be out of nice paper. Yale does it. It's Yale University Press. Yale does their books right. The publication timelines are fucking horrific, but the books come out great. I love buying them, reading them, and writing them. So The Rivalry Peril, it'll be out in less than 4 weeks. And I'll talk more about that soon. And in fact, opening segment today, there is a tie-in with The Rivalry Peril. So I had a piece with Mike Brennis, my co-author of the book, in Jacobin magazine like 2 weeks ago. It was bad timing because like the Trump election had just happened, and then right after that we went into the Christmas holidays. And so in that sort of middle space where everybody's mind was either focused on holidays or focused on impending doom, that was the moment when the Jacobin piece came out. So it got no fucking traction whatsoever. Hello, Toast Patrol 29. Oh, chat, if you subscribe at tier 3, you can get the crappy galley paper version. I will, if I ever am able to like turn on the subscriptions for this, I'll do some sort of like you get an e-copy or something. I don't know. There's some things to figure out there. But the Jacobin piece talked about the kind of origin story of great power competition, which is really the like Washington normie way to talk about inter-imperial rivalry, because functionally that's what it is. And so the book lays out our theory of China, and I'll talk more about that another day. The Jacobin piece talks a little bit about it as well. We sort of explain how like all the normal takes on China rivalry or why we should have a beef with China, none of those takes fully make sense, and they don't fully account for like China as it actually exists. But one thing that actually does fully account for not only China as it actually exists, but also how America is responding to China in this, highly securitized, highly racialized, and highly insecure kind of way, like little dick energy. That all of that are signs that like great power competition, quote unquote, is a symptom, an expression of a crisis of capital accumulation. And this, even though this sounds like it's just a random thing I'm talking about, there's a tie-in, an important tie-in with something else in the news that like everyone is talking about and that you wouldn't think has to do with foreign policy at all, right? But it does. And that's this, what I'm calling the oligarch-fascist contradiction, right? There's everybody has been fucking talking about this. I wrote a piece on it in the newsletter. Can I share it? Can I share it? Let's see. Duh, 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 duh. Booyah. So the piece that I wrote about this was titled "A Capitalist Ethno-Nationalist Contradiction in the MAGA Coalition." This Elon has been on one tweeting about this in various hot takes that he has his impulsive Twitter finger. But this tweet here was kind of the money shot. Like this says it all, right? The reason I'm in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H-1B, the visa program. Take a big step back and go fuck yourself in the face. I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you cannot possibly comprehend. Go fuck yourself in the face. What's hilarious about that is, like, right after that, he tweeted a plea, a request for everyone to use the platform in a way that says nice things, which is like pot calling the kettle black. I mean, like, what? Like, what? You ran off all the nice libs. The nice libs went to blue sky. So, like, anyway, so Elon clearly has strong personal feelings about H-1B, right? The visa program that is for talented foreigners to come over into America, right? Um, and this nests nicely within the sort of the ideology of Silicon Valley, the ideology of techno-utopianism, Silicon Valley bro ideology, for all its warts. It emerged in the era of neoliberal globalization when neoliberalism was hegemonic, right? And so Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon, the tech bro world, what's happening and what's getting all the news is that they are vocally confronting, in their own weird right-wing way, the ethno-nationalists within their own coalition. The MAGA coalition is a mix of ethno-nationalists and white supremacists on the one hand, but then owners of capital on the other, the oligarchs, the plutes, you know, and the tech bros and the financiers. They're all just plutes. But anyways, those guys are, I mean, Elon is saying he's like going to go to war over this issue, but like their view has always been actually, so H-1B is a carve out, I should say. H-1B is a visa. It's a talent visa. It's for like the 1%, like the highly skilled workers, right? But H-1B is part of a larger pro-immigration ideology that like Silicon Valley has had. I think they probably care more about being able to recruit the best tech talent or whatever from the rest of the world and poach that or hoard that. But in general, they've had this ideology that wants immigration because immigration is surplus labor, right? And so the capitalist class needs surplus labor in order to keep labor cheap and politically weak. If there's a labor shortage, wages go up because demand for labor would be increasing, right? But increased wages, happier workers mean increased working class power, right? If they're not being grinded into the dust. So in the previous era, capitalists dealt with the problem of needing to keep labor weak and to have surplus labor available by outsourcing cheap labor from the global south, from the third world, and then importing cheap labor immigrants from abroad, right? And so that was the neoliberal formula. And that is partially what's being challenged by like Steve Bannon and the MAGA coalition. Like that configuration or framework of policies does not work if you're trying to create a white supremacist utopia doing some sort of neo-feudal thing, you know? So, yes, Elon is such a twat. So, so anyway, Elon is on one about specifically H-1B, and I noticed on Twitter that there's a bunch of, like, edge cases, like, outlier individuals, extremely talented people, like, ethnically Chinese people who started AI small AI companies or who have hedge funds, and they happen to be foreigners, and they're making noise on Twitter and getting a lot of boosting and amplification from Elon, and that what they're arguing is like, look, I just raised a $20 million round. I have a PhD from MIT. I'm leading edge of AI and, like, semiconductor research and all this shit. And then they're saying, and I just got denied my H-1B for some weird reason, right? Which they attribute to a broken immigration system, right? And that is like, I you want to be able to attract talent from abroad, right? But that is a kind of weird version of it, because, like, what these foreigners are saying is like, look, you're going to have an exclusionary country, a racially pure country. I'm down for it. A racially pure oligarchy. But just let me in. Let me be on the inside at the country club. Like, they want to get into the country club. They don't give a fuck about making the American immigration system more inclusive or more systematic. They just care about getting theirs, you know? And so the focus on H-1B is a little bit unfortunate because it's a one percenter immigration program, basically. Um, but the larger point that I've been trying to make on this exact topic that, like, a lot of people who comment on this are missing is that there is and there will continue to be a larger structural contradiction between the fascists and the oligarchs. The capitalist class needs surplus labor. They always have. We need to be expendable. When Amazon warehouses, like we covered in the last live stream, when you got workers on strike right now, but those warehouses burn through employees so fast. The turnover is unbelievable. Like, there's nobody in those warehouses who was also in those warehouses in 2018, except for like onesie twosies. Like, they burned through their entire employee roster. But that's part of surplus labor. If you have people on the outside that you can just hire in to replace the ones who burn out, then you can keep burning them out. You don't have to treat them better. You don't have to give them a fair deal. You don't have to give them a living wage. You don't have to give them better safety conditions, working conditions. You can just torch their fucking lives, and then when they're all incinerated, go get new bodies. That's the beauty of surplus labor for the capitalist class. It's always been like this. It's like this now, but those Amazon warehouses, just for example, they're going to need bodies. And if you close off immigration, you're closing off a major source of surplus labor. And so, however this specific feud gets resolved, like, I have a feeling that, H-1B is going to be preserved, sacrosanct, whatever. Like, that's not going anywhere, because the capitalists want it. But however that's resolved, there's going to remain this larger tension, and the tension is best represented in, like, the avatars of, like, Elon Musk on the one hand and, like, Steve Bannon on the other. And so, if the ethno-nationalists get their way, a white supremacist society does exclude immigrants, talented or not, And if the oligarchs get their way, the white supremacists are never going to get their way, right? And so that's the dance to watch. And, like, people talking about this as if it's just a political feud. You're hoping the MAGA coalition implodes, which, of course, why not? Of course you want that, but covering it that way is wrong, because this is actually like a huge contradiction that we should be attending to, you know. Um, yes, I wish they'd just deport Elon since it's come out that he's here on false pretenses. Yeah, that's interesting. And go back to the earlier tweet. Elon is such a twat. Um, so, oh, and so one way to think about it's like I've kind of registered my priors about like how I make sense of the world, you know, heavily like, I'm a kind of a structuralist, a materialist. I'm thinking about the world as a world, not just like individual country units. And that matters in a case like this. Um, because and this comes back to my book and the explanation for great power rivalry itself, right? So uh, I spoke recently at the New Zealand Fabian Society, and the talk was about the Sino-US rivalry stuff. And again, I'll say more about that on another day. But the thing that I wanted to flag here is I'll just show the clip. It's like 1 minute. There's one little excerpt from the talk that I gave, and it bears on everything we just talked about with Elon, ethno-nationalism, oligarchy, the conflict. So let me share that. Here we go.
In order to do state-driven capitalism, you end up having to exploit nationalism. There's an ideology that has to do work there. So using state power, you build national power, you strengthen yourself, you weaken your competitors. But as I'm sure some of you know, nationalism is a pretty dangerous force. It's prone to a politics of reaction. It isn't, by definition, exclusionary. It often assumes scarcity, particularly about things like security, and it becomes a justification for violence against those that you've ring-fenced on the outside, right? And in the US and China in particular, this force is ethnically charged. It's ethno-nationalism, right? In both countries, nationalism has an exceptionalist quality. They both talk and sometimes act as if they are special, as if they have some kind of divine right? As if their behavior is exempt from the rules that everyone else plays by. Great power exceptionalism of this kind is nothing new, but it could coexist in a high-growth world. It wasn't a source of World War III in a high-growth world. We're not in a high-growth world anymore, right? Nope. So what we're left with is militarism and economic nationalism, and who benefits from that? Not lovers of democracy, not lovers of peace, and not workers.
Booyah. So the Fabian Society, for people who don't know, it started in the UK, and it still exists in the UK, but it's like this kind of, it's like do-gooder socialists, if you want to think of it like that. Like, it's democratic socialist, it's non-revolutionary, and they tend to focus historically on the policy level, like what ought we do with policy in order to move us towards social democracy, right? And so they care a lot about rebalancing power within society in favor of workers, economic redistribution, economic democracy, peace, of course, all that stuff, anti-militarism. So they have like a generally very good politics. So I went and spoke there. But my point in that talk and in that clip you just saw was that like rivalry itself in the geopolitical sense is downstream of a crisis of capital accumulation in a world of high growth. Antagonistic great powers, narcissistic great powers. In a world of high growth, they could coexist and get along and have a kind of détente, they could think in positive some ways, But in a world, ever since the global financial crisis, we've been in a kind of secular stagnation. Growth has never recovered in most economies. Chinese growth has, of course, even though it used to be breakneck, it's been slowing down. It's the same in the US. Like, we're not growing. The rest of the world is not growing either. So where am I going with this? If great power competition is being fueled by ethno-nationalism, but that ethno-nationalism is being fueled by a crisis of capital accumulation, then the politics of ethno-nationalism that we see within America, that is actually like secondary, or what's the word? It's not the driver, right? Epiphenomenal, right? Or like in the Marxist sense, like base superstructure, like it's the superstructure, like, and so that's my kind of read on it. Like, that's the best way to understand great power competition itself. But if that's correct, this gets back to the larger point. If I'm right about that, then the capitalist class, the Elon Musks, are the ones who are going to prevail. Ultimately, it's the bankers who prevail within the political coalition. The ethno-nationalists are kind of the useful idiots, right? That doesn't mean that they're not dangerous, that you don't take them seriously. It doesn't mean that they're not true believers. Like, I think Bannon really does eat his own dog food on this. Like, and that's a scary thing. There's like, the ethno-nationalist politics in America is authentic. It's genuinely felt. But in terms of like watching what happens with the political coalition and where all of this goes, if I'm right about great power competition, then that also probably applies to this situation about immigration. And that means ultimately we're going to end up probably having some sort of kayfabe immigration ban, where we do ban immigration in some like hardcore way for a short period of time or something like that. But ultimately, there's going to have to be a way to remedy this for the capitalist class. They need that surplus labor. You cannot just deny them it. And the thing that I fear, like I talked about in the last live stream, which I need to articulate more, or like more thoroughly in writing or something, because I don't see anybody else talking about this. Thing that I fear is that they're going to compensate for an immigration ban by, I don't know, granting Elon a concession on like H-1Bs, so we get the 1% people, but then compensating for the surplus labor that's being denied, getting that compensation from expanding the prison population, forcing large numbers of Americans to be surplus labor. Pro-Palestinian activists go and work at fucking prison as prison labor. The homelessness thing that I'm so freaked out about is like the idea that to be homeless is a criminal act justifies putting them in these labor camps for homelessness, internment camps that are used as free labor, basically. And if that's the way to compensate for an immigration ban, that's the darkest of the darkest shit you could ever imagine. Doesn't get worse than that. So, not loving that. Anyways, so that's what to watch for. I think the oligarchs are probably going to win. I don't think this is going to explode their existing coalition, but it's good to identify the contradictions, because that might provide openings. So related to the Elon Musk Silicon Valley stuff, like one of the ways that Elon makes a lot of money, it's not just from Tesla, like in the Silicon Valley bros especially, it's from contracts with the Pentagon. And I talked briefly last week, I think, about the kind of alliance that is the Silicon Valley bro cartel, like literal cartel that's forming with like Palantir and Anduril and the small subcontractors for the defense industry, they're all getting together and trying to like rebalance the power relationship with the Pentagon so that the Pentagon cannot use the corporate competition over government contracts. They can't use that to their advantage. The corporations are getting together to collectively pitch the Pentagon, a consensual rather than, or a conspiratorial rather than a competitive relationship. And this is obviously going to lead to a lot of like inflation of contracts, but also inflation of threats, and that's been going on for a while, and it probably deserves to be talked about more at a later date. But Elon is not a man of peace. Vivek Ramaswamy, actually wrote about him when he was running for president. Not a man of peace. These folks are not peaceful. And part of their shtick, no matter what they think about like Ukraine or some specific issue, part of their issue is that they're part of the defense industrial complex now. And so I thought it would be useful to like briefly reshare Eisenhower's parting speech about the defense industrial complex. Don't want to show the whole speech. It's not a long speech anyway. I just want to like revisit his warning for people who haven't seen it. But also there's like one brief part later on in the speech that I want to like fast forward to that people don't talk about. And it's relevant to all of this once again. Let me see if I can pull this up. Eisenhower is not super fucking charismatic, but it is what it is. So here's the key part.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to the part that I want to share in 1 second. This, many people have seen this or at least read the speech before. In the beginning, the first part that I played, like he's reflecting the Munich analogy that colored every single policymaker's mind in the early Cold War, right? This belief, he's basically saying like the military industrial complex is a necessary evil for the world that I accept. he being Eisenhower, I being Eisenhower, you know, say like he believes that the Soviet Union represents this totalitarian global ideology that must be confronted militarily, in addition to other ways. And there's a massive overstatement there. He's obviously the ultimate, like he's a Cold War liberal, but he just happens to be sensitive to the price we might have to pay to do all that, you know. But he believes, so like he's not fucking leftist, you know what I mean? Like he believes appeasement makes the aggressor more aggressive. He basically says that readiness to use overwhelming force prevents opportunistic aggression. He basically believes that, right? Sort of bullshit. And that set of beliefs is sort of bullshit. It's definitely overstated, but it was the ideology of the times. It's arguably the ideology of Washington right now. And it leads to, and the thing that he laments, Eisenhower laments, is that like thinking like this ends up necessitating a permanent defense industrial complex, right? And the new defense industrial complex is the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels cashing in on, you know, tech fears, AI arms racing, and all this shit, you know, Anduril building tons of cheap drones. Anyway, the part that like, there's just like a 2-second reference in here that I want to share because it's notable and no one ever talks about this part. 12, 15. So here.
Cannot be abandoned for the certainty agony of disarmament of the battlefield. Disarmament with mutual honor and confidence is a continuing imperative.
That's it. Disarmament is a continuing imperative, you know? And so the president of the United States, a Cold War liberal, a hawk, a guy who thought it was necessary to have a defense industrial complex, like even he thought that disarmament was not just a legitimate discourse and a legitimate thing to pursue. He thought it was necessary. He thought it was the ultimate goal, you know? And like, think about, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with like the Washington sort of the boundaries of what's acceptable in Washington. It is totally unacceptable to talk about disarmament. It's like delegitimizing. So like the closest you can get to disarmament talk nowadays is to talk about arms control, and arms control itself is fucking dead, obviously. And that's in the 80s. I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but like in the 80s, a lot of the disarmament activists, they saw arms control itself as this trap or like this halfway measure. Like it was a way of shutting down disarmament. Hey, Peacefire Now is in the fucking chat. That's awesome. I just watched his stream the other day. I'm a subscriber. It's fucking awesome. Glad I could catch your stream. Wish you tried to do something about instead of just sending out warning for futures. Yeah, Eisenhower shit the bed. I feel like presidents feel like they're helpless. You know, I got that vibe from Obama a lot too. Like they feel like they can't actually do anything except the bully pulpit, except say things on their, you know, fucking Twitter accounts, basically, which is like weird because it's also the imperial presidency. Like there is no check on their power except what Congress denies them, you know. I think the bureaucracy makes you feel, this was my sense inside the system too, like the bureaucracy makes you feel little dick energy. It makes you feel helpless, you know, like, or like there's just too much going on. It's too complicated. You really can't wrap your mind around everything that's happening. There can be this level of intimidation when people with like shiny things on their shoulders walk in and shiny things on their chest walk in, you know? So I don't know. Yeah, Eisenhower kind of fucked us. But at least he gave us a warning. I don't know. So, but yeah, so like disarmament is legitimate. It's not just legitimate, it's fucking a necessary goal. It's the vision toward which we ought to sort of aspire. And then having that North Star in mind, we ought to be asking ourselves, how do we fucking navigate there? You know what I mean? And by like delegitimizing disarmament, Washington has made it very impossible to navigate toward that, to opt into the kinds of policies that would sort of get us there. And in the last stream, I talked about extended deterrence, why it's like a lot. Actually, I'll share that, like the 30-second version of that real quick. Let me see if I can. There was a bunch of comments that I got after the stream once I released a clip version of this, talking about extended deterrence being a lie, and it made me feel like I needed to address the disarmament thing quickly. So let's see here. If you don't know, what extended deterrence is, just as like a context setting up here, it's the promise to use nukes on behalf of a nation that doesn't have nukes if they're attacked with nukes by somebody else. Okay, so it's inherently incredible, not believable. What are the odds that you're going to use nukes against some enemy country because they used nukes against a country that's not you? Like the stakes of nuclear war are so high, they're existential. You would probably not do that. Maybe you do it, probably not. It's not rational to do it, right? And so extended deterrence is about the promise of doing that irrational thing. What we call extended deterrence, extended nuclear deterrence, is never primarily about an enemy. And it's always primarily about mollifying or appeasing a client state, an ally. Not just a client state, but like specifically the warmongers and the militarists and the warhawks within the client state. Typically the conservatives within a client state. And why am I mentioning this? Okay, the State Department. So that was the gist of it. I don't need to share the whole thing, but the comments that I got back from a couple of people were like, well, extended deterrent, like promising the American nuclear umbrella to allies, it's kind of like the necessary evil or the least worst path. And it's like, I explained in that, I'm not going to show the clip, but like I explained later in the clip about how I was like the OG guy making extended deterrence a thing, in like a popular thing that we sold to allies in the Obama administration. And I'm atoning for that, right? But basically, like the extended deterrence sort of language, this grammar of militarism is very much a trap. Like it's not only is does it foreclose on any possibility of like getting to disarmament, but for like reasons that I'll talk about once we get to the Korea shit, like it is like, it's not foreclosing on allies going nuclear. It's not stopping them from going nuclear, which is what we tell ourselves. We offer promises of our nuclear umbrella to stop our allies from going nuclear. Everybody believes that in Washington. I believed that at one point, but that's clearly not what's happening. What's happening is promising a nuclear umbrella to allies allows the hawks in ally countries and ally client states to come back to us and say, we rely on your nuclear umbrella for our security. And if you take it away, then we are justified in going nuclear. So like there's by providing the nuclear umbrella, by providing promises of extended deterrence, we are facilitating them going nuclear, because this is not something we can just sustain forever. And this is what Trump actually and MAGA represents. And so we'll talk about I want to like bracket off the Korea stuff for the moment, but all to say is like, we're so far away from what even Eisenhower, this bumbling Cold War hawk, you know, like even he recognized the necessity of having disarmament within your horizons. And that's totally fucking lost, you know. Right now, the best that it feels like anyone can come up with in Washington is like, maybe we keep the alliance and let the allies go nuclear, or maybe we threaten more nukes ourselves and spend $1.7 trillion on nuclear modernization ourselves, and let the allies go nuclear. It's like, what the fuck? Like, this is all, it's fucking, it's insane, you know? Anyways, the other thing I want, so this is, I don't have a video for this, of course, but right before jumping on the stream, I published a piece called, what did I call it? Let me see. It's 30 minutes old, so let's see. Falling Out: The Politics of Generation GWOT, right? So I had been working on this post for a while. It just so happens I decided I needed to publish it before the stream today so that I could talk about it on the stream. So already streaming on Twitch has like fucked up my priorities. um, what triggered me to write this? I mean, I write a lot about like my personal intersections with foreign policy and how I've sort of evolved over the years, but or like how I see things now versus how I used to see things, etc. But the Wall Street Journal, of all places, had this interesting piece about what they called Generation GWOT, the global war on terror, right? And what they talked about in the piece was like, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, JD Vance, they're not the only ones, but they are among a cohort of basically elder millennials like this guy, and who experienced military life like this guy during the war on terror years like this guy, right? And they sort of acknowledge that the generation GWOT breaks left and breaks right, you know, like it's not a monolith, and it's kind of like their terminology. I've seen other people refer to generation GWOT, but it's just the idea that like, if you're growing up in an era, I mean, probably a lot of people on the stream, if you're growing up in an era that is known as the global war on terror, as like the framework you exist within, where you are expected to go along with like everyday life while there's a global war going on, while your government is doing that, that's fucking not great, you know? And it's going to affect you. It's going to affect your worldview. It's going to affect how you see things, right? And what's special or unique about the people who grew up during the war on terror years, but who were professionally at the coalface of it, is that they were like kind of the point of production for American primacy, you know, like the war fighters who were at the coalface. And I didn't actually see combat because I was in the fucking Air Force, but like it's people who were in uniform who were at the coalface of American primacy. That was the point of production for this grand strategy, this predatory way of relating to the world that we call primacy. And what Hegseth and Gabbard and JD Vance and like basically the right wing generation GWOT, what they represent is an alienation and a disgust with the global war on terror as they saw it. And it's not clear if they're just fucking cynical or not, you know, like, but or like if they've learned the wrong lessons. Like what I think I see from them is an alienation from the war on terror, but without learning like any real lessons from it. So like they have turned rightward and embraced kind of ethno-nationalism and like doubled down on American exceptionalism in response to these 20 years of failed wars. Like they look at the cost of it And they think like, this is because we were trying to like build nations. This is because we were too do-gooder and we need to be more bare knuckle. Like that's the sort of the right variant of generation GWOT. And that's kind of bullshit. Like obviously, I mean, I think ethno-nationalism as a fucking foreign policy, and certainly imperialism as a foreign policy, Trump-imperialism, that is a mutation of generation GWOT. That is still primacy. That's not post-primacist. Imperialism is its own it's a variant of primacy, you know? And so like they're not like abandoning primacy. They're not trying to relate to the world in other than a predatory way. They're going to relate to the world in a hyper predatory way. But anyway, the thing that I think is notable about this, about the existence of Generation GWOT, and the fact that Generation GWOT is on the mic, you know, speaking out to the public, writing, engaging in policy debates and shit, but also in the halls of power, literally the vice president coming in, the DNI coming in, the Secretary of Defense coming in, possibly if he doesn't, you know, if he can get through confirmation hearings, like people in power now, the political class has within it Generation GWOT people. And the thing that we share in common is a kind of disgust and alienation with the defense industrial complex, with the notion of forever wars, right? The right-wing version is taking this in an imperial direction. Which is a total failure to have fucking learned anything, in my view. It's a continuation of GWOT by another name, in my view, you know. But those guys, like, they still represent something in common with people like me, which is that like we see that at a minimum, at a very bare minimum, being against World War III, being against forever wars is smart politics. So even if these right-wing fucks are just pure cynics and political opportunists, which I would not doubt it. I mean, like, that's very plausible. Even if that's true, the fact that they recognize that the political terrain has shifted and that war is not cool, war is not to just be taken for granted, that is something. And the thing that I think it is, what I argue in this Generation GWOT piece, my take here is that the experience of Generation GWOT represents a crisis in the social reproduction of American primacy, right? And so the thing that I point out is that American primacy, this ideology of American power, right, that we relate to the world in a dominating predatory way, and we have for decades now, that grand strategy is sustained by not a mass social order, not society per se. It's sustained by an elite social order, because foreign policy is an elite activity. And so foreign policy elites go to the same sets of finishing schools. They have the same sets of vocational experiences, working in law or Wall Street or increasingly tech or in government. And it's basically like limited to those areas, right? And primarily now, like they work in fucking think tanks, and then they get their money from tech or Wall Street or law, you know. But they spend their time in think tanks and in government and rotating in and out. And like, I was part of that system for a while. And when I was part of that system, I watched how their social order sustained itself and reproduced itself. And it was by cultivating a bubble of sort of like homogenous common sense and conformity intellectually. And so what they were doing was like your life, like you literally spent it all giving very anodyne pull quotes to journalists, and then going on fucking trips, often to like nice places, Japan, Australia, Korea. And then when you weren't going to the nice countries, when you were going to countries that were less developed, which are very nice, by the way, but you would not experience the countries as they exist. You would only go visit the sort of richest, bougiest enclaves within the countries. So your experience of foreign worlds was simply a copy and paste of corporate Americana, Starbucks. And the world is a Starbucks and a luxury hotel lobby. And everywhere you go, you're hitting the Starbucks, you're hanging out in the luxury hotel lobby, and then you're saying your 5 minutes or 10 minutes of remarks. You're going to meet with various government officials, and then you're going out and having excellent sushi at the best restaurants. And this is literally your fucking life. And so you're if that's how you live, you're very invested in sustaining it. And the price of staying within that lifestyle is intellectual conformity. It is accepting the common sense of the people around you who are also hanging out in the luxury hotel lobby, who are also eating the excellent sushi, right? And so like you have accepted that American power is a greater good. It's a public good. Our primacy is to the world's benefit. That's what you fucking believe. And you operate in this idea space where you're supposed to be coming up with like policy ideas about what is to be done, what should we do, but it's from the premise that America is the exceptional nation, and that there's lots of bad guys in the world that just don't like us for mysterious reasons, and also that American power is the solution to basically all problems. And it's like you're coming up with policies about what is to be done, but it's within those constraints. So no wonder all you can come up with is fucking extended deterrence. No wonder all you can come up with is like $1.7 trillion of nuclear modernization. No wonder you think it's really important to support Israel during its genocide in fucking Gaza. No wonder you think war on the Houthis accomplishes something. No wonder you think $900 billion Pentagon budget is worthwhile, worth the trade-off, worth the homelessness, the record homelessness happening in America. You know what I mean? So that's all fucked. But like what to go back to the Generation GWOT piece, my point with all of that is simply that like this predatory way of relating to the world that we call American primacy, that is experiencing a crisis of social reproduction. Okay. It's being taken where it goes is up for debate and contest. And it's being taken under MAGA. It's being taken in an imperial direction, which is arguably even worse than the war on terror. And so we're not going toward liberation. The mountaintop is in the rearview mirror, not in front of us, unfortunately. But it's notable that like the political coalition, the foreign policy coalition, the social order of these elites and their fealty to primacy, that is being disrupted. Generation GWOT has experiences that these other foreign policy elites, these mandarins, the wonks, do not have. And so the Generation GWOT people within the foreign policy world and within the political world especially, they are going a different way. How does that find expression? Sometimes it's like suspending aid to Ukraine or forcing a settlement or something. Sometimes it might be working out a deal over Taiwan. Sometimes it might be straight up fucking gangster imperialism, like trying to annex Greenland and the fucking Panama Canal. But all to say, we don't know where this will go, but it's significant that there has been an unsettling. Primacy is no longer reproducing itself. That hermetic seal that we've had that has prevented the ability to change foreign policy has broken. So now there is space. It's not always for the good. I can't foot stomp that enough, but there's space for change, and we're operating on a different terrain than before. And I'm pretty sure the last people to grasp this are the Washington mandarins, the Washington foreign policy elites, the libs are going to be the last to fucking understand that primacy as they have known it is gone. And if they're defending it, they're defending a dead project. And I think in some ways that's what the Biden administration has already been doing. It's just that we couldn't see the impact of Generation GWOT disrupting and unsettling everything until they started coming into political power. And Generation GWOT had no political power in the Biden years, but they're definitely coming to power during the Trump years, Trump 2.0 years. Unfortunately, it's the right-wing version of it, which is ethno-nationalist and clearly fucking imperial. Trumperial. So, yeah, that's Generation GWOT. What else we got? Oh, man. I know New Zealand is not everybody, like most people don't know fuck all about New Zealand. It doesn't get a lot of attention. There is an end of year speech on the parliament floor by a very charismatic Green Party member here in New Zealand named Chloe Swarbrick. And I feel like people may not realize this, but like New Zealand is a super fucking weird place. It has some trappings of social democracy and like a public healthcare system, and all the universities here are public, but there's also like really, really strong neoliberal vibes. They don't produce except for export, like they don't produce much other than agriculture. And they, starting in the 1980s, they went kind of all in on neoliberal orthodoxy. And like even the Labor Party has been complicit in this, just in the same way that the Democrats have been complicit in neoliberalism in America, right? So there's an analog with the New Zealand situation. But we're in New Zealand, we're currently in a fucking economic recession, and it was caused directly by the current right-wing government's interventions to basically slash and burn public services, like to self-impose austerity amid inflation. And like New Zealand's been world leader in raising fucking interest rates, which has killed the housing situation in New Zealand, and really put a strain on homeowners in New Zealand, because they don't do 30-year fixed rate mortgages in New Zealand. Like it's very hard to get that deal. In America, that's the norm. In New Zealand, they push everybody into floating adjustable rate mortgages. And then the central bank in New Zealand jacked up interest rates before any other central bank a couple years ago. And they've been like leading that fight on behalf of oligarchs, but so that's a setup, a context. Chloe Swarbrick makes this like little 4-minute intervention, this speech. It's fire and brimstone. You will love it. So let me play it here 1 second. It's a perfect sort of diagnosis of like what the ruling government coalition is sort of doing.
This Minister of Finance have exacerbated the recession. The Reserve Bank initially indicated that we were facing just a light downturn, but now the growth numbers keep on getting worse. This time last
I should say she'll refer to HIFU or HEFU a couple times. That's half-year economic and fiscal update. So it's just jargon.
Last year, HIFU was projecting a 1.5% growth this year. Now the actual rate is minus 0.2%. 2%. And Mr. Speaker, next year's growth at the budget in May was projected to be 1.7%, but it's now projected to be 0.5%. That is because, Mr. Speaker, this government is not even meeting its own rhetoric and metrics of economic orthodoxy. The government is cutting its spending from approximately 34% to 30%, but it knows that households and small businesses, and definitely not the oligopoly that we've been talking about at Finance and Expenditure Committee, they are not going to fill that gap. Mr. Speaker, government decisions made by the politicians sitting on that side of the House are diminishing the growth that they so love to talk about. They are diminishing productivity, and they are knowingly increasing inequality and climate changing emissions. Which Minister of Climate Change will only make things worse for future generations. Treasury's forecasts have only massively deteriorated since the government took power.
I just want to say, I'll keep playing this in a second. She's clearly really charismatic, and she's on her shit. Like, her mind fires more in a more focused way and in a sort of rapid fire, I know my shit way than like half of these old fucks on the parliament, on the beehive floor here. Let's keep going. I think she could end up being prime minister here one day if the politics can accommodate it.
In just 1 year, the Crown's forecast operating balance for 2025 has worsened rather, by 50%, from a deficit of $6.6 billion to $9.9 billion.
That woman you saw walking across the floor in purple was Nicola Willis. She's the finance minister, and she didn't want to stay around and hear how she's completely fucked New Zealand. And so she decided to walk out in the middle of the speech because her ears were burning.
It's unprecedented outside of global financial crises. And Mr. Speaker, it's self-inflicted because the government has decided to contract its spending so much. Haifu shows us, Mr. Speaker, what all of us know. That is that tax revenues have stalled due to unemployment, which government decisions have exacerbated, and company failures and a deep recession, that the government expenditure is climbing due to that unemployment and those company failures. And there is no evidence whatsoever, no plan that we are hearing from this government to get us out of that. Because, Mr. Speaker, this is the austerity playbook. It is to defund public services to failure, to watch them fail, point that out to the public, and then say, hey, we should privatize that. So mark my words, Mr. Speaker, that is the next thing on the agenda. Treasury notes that the government's planned road building frenzy, which the Minister of Transport was crowing about in question time today, has no believable source of revenue other than to widen the deficit faster than Waka Kotahi can widen those lanes. Mr. Speaker, we heard just before from the Minister of Finance about how if you want a nicer car, you've got to earn more money. I think the minister who was doling out to members of the opposition some orthodox economic speaking notes should in fact reflect on the fact that the economy is not a car. The economy is all of us, the stuff that we create, and the rules that we put in place in order to try and get certain outcomes. And what this Haifu underscores is that we are setting up for a two-track economy. That is wage and salary earners, beneficiaries, and small businesses all going backwards. Meanwhile, the oligopolies, that is our banks, our supermarkets, and our gentailers, will continue to compound their power and their profit under decisions made by this government. We can, Mr. Speaker, have a better world. It is entirely within our grasp. And in fact, all members of this chamber know that because all members of this chamber were across the IRD report released last year, which told us that the top 311 households in this country hold more wealth combined than the bottom 2.5 million New Zealanders. And Mr. Speaker, that is not an accident. That is a conscious decision made by politicians in this place to entrench a tax system that we all know sees those at the top pay an effective tax rate less than half that of the average New Zealander. That is our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, and those public servants at the front line who are paying double the effective tax rate of the wealthiest, and this landlord government is laughing their way to the bank.
Boom. That was dope as shit. She's fucking gangster, like that's fucking, she's on one in the best way. And she's like, she knows her shit, which is what makes it really work. Like for people who don't know, it might seem weird to call out your supermarket oligopoly. There's only 2 grocery stores in New Zealand, and they function as a cartel or a duopoly, 2 major grocery stores, I should say. And so they are able to like price fix and kind of get away with it because there's no alternative, and it's like that across many sectors of the New Zealand economy, where it's like wealth and power concentrates in the hands of like a few, at the expense of like wider society. And the larger issue that Chloe is sort of railing against here is really that like New Zealand is she called it a landlord government, right? It's a rentier economy. So like anyone with money in New Zealand, they either got it from overseas work or overseas markets or overseas businesses or exports to overseas, or they got it through owning land, the landed aristocracy. Like you just happen to be lucky enough to be older and to have bought it earlier or something, it's like people who have money in New Zealand, that's how they fucking got it. Like it's not an economy that produces, and that the fact that it's a rentier economy, like what that means, what that refers to is that like the rich are rich because they're hoarding money, and because they're, again, not producing. So the owners of capital they're not like they're owners of land, not the means of production. There are no means of production really here except for like agriculture stuff. And so the government, the current right-wing coalition government, has made these like really hardcore Milton Friedman, Hayekian, neoliberal, orthodox policy decisions to like literally austeritize the economy, to cut government spending everywhere it can, tons of downward pressure. And this is a way of financing tax cuts. It's like George W. Bush era shit, and so the natural consequence of that is that New Zealand is in an economic recession. It is a neoliberally induced recession, a self-induced recession. So of course, people like Chloe are going to be fire and brimstone about this, because it's like, who would not be outraged by that? It's just the fact that people don't understand. Like the average person is, you have your political tribe or whatever. If you're not part of the land owning class in New Zealand, you're getting absolutely fucking soaked by these austerity policies. Like your life is made so much harder by this current government's policies. So shout out to Chloe for being on one. So what else we got? Oh, a brief story here in Politico. I don't have a ton to say about this, but I just wanted to flag it. This Chinese hackers used broad telecoms access to geolocate millions of Americans and record phone calls. So on some level, this is like, it sounds, scary. If you saw a story like this, 25 years ago, it would probably be like terrifying, or like, oh my God, like send in the National Guard or some shit. I don't know. But so the story says a Chinese hacking group dubbed Salt Typhoon infiltrated US telecoms providers and used their covert access to steal a trove of Americans' cell phone records and listen in on the conversation of senior US political figures, including the Biden administration, Trump campaign people, blah, blah, blah. So this, this is, I don't want to trivialize this because like that's obviously not great. China's ability to geolocate Americans or to geolocate foreigners in America is or can be part of enforcing political discipline on Chinese diaspora. And that's something that like Xi Jinping and the party have said out loud that they do. And that's part of what the United Front Department work does, like the overseas propaganda arm, or like the Ministry of State Security doesn't respect national boundaries. Like that's a problem, like it's a problem when fucking Modi's regime in India does that shit. It's a problem when China does it. It's a problem when anybody does it. America probably does it better than anyone else, to be honest. But like, this is not like a great thing. But like, I have two sort of like contrarian thoughts about this. One, and the Politico piece goes on to say that like they don't know if China still has this access, this ability to like geolocate Americans and like listen to their phones and shit. They don't know if they still have that access or if they've lost it once we discovered this program, right? But either way, my like sort of contrarian view is that like in the same way that Gaza has blown a hole in our moral universe, which is what that's Naomi Klein's phrase. I think it's a very good one. In the same way that Gaza's blown a hole in our moral universe and therefore numbed us to any kind of dehumanization or violence that we might do against others. I think that America, the national security state, and the Patriot Act, having the end like the Edward Snowden revelations, although there wasn't a lot, I think we all knew that America was listening, spying on its allies, spying on Americans, but like that, all of that also blew a hole in our moral universe when it came to espionage and counter-espionage. Like if America, like if one government is already listening to all of our phone calls and has the ability to geolocate us, why is it such a big deal that another government can also do that? It's almost inevitable that another government can also do that. If one government can, another government can. You know what I mean? And so like we created almost a moral hazard problem for ourselves in being able to feel scandalized by this Chinese hacker shit, because we have been spying on the world and our own citizens for, half of my lifetime, my entire adult life, basically. And so we have so now like the national security state wants us to be scandalized by Chinese hackers being able to geolocate Americans and listen to their phone calls, which I'm not a fan of. I certainly don't fucking like that. And it would be nice if they couldn't do that. But the best way to have sort of foreclosed on that possibility was to not open that door in the first place. We can't be okay with the US government doing it, but then be not okay with other governments doing it. That's a fucking double standard. It doesn't matter that it's under our same citizenship flag. They will come for you too. That's part of MAGA's, that's part of like Project 2025. That's part of the war on sanctuary cities that's coming. They will come for you too. That's part of the war on pro-Palestine activists that's coming. They will come for you too, So the issue is governments having the ability to do this full stop. So it's bad when all governments can listen to your phone calls and geolocate and all that shit. Might as well be on a Twitch live stream, I digress. So yeah. The other thought I had, which is very related, is that if you accept geopolitical rivalry as part of your reality, if you think it is good or necessary or even just like is anything other than intolerable, if you think geopolitical rivalry needs to be part of your life as a state, then you have to accept the consequences of what that means. One of the consequences of having geopolitical rivals of having enemies abroad is necessarily the spy versus spy stuff. This was some of the bullshit about the Chinese weather balloon, spy balloon thing a year ago. Like being scandalized by that was to be scandalized with a symptom of geopolitical competition, even as you're doing geopolitical competition with full fucking gusto, you know? And so this is hypocritical at best, but also stupid, you know? And so the idea that you're going to try and hype up alarm when China's doing normal spy versus spy stuff that you would expect them to do if you have named them as a fucking enemy. Well, the consequence of hyping up that threat is going to necessarily mean more jingoism and racism. It has to be like a kind of ethno-nationalist implication necessarily, because you're trying to create a sense of scandal about something that you also do. And that is happening because you have opted into this framework of competition with this other guy. So we make our bed, we have to sleep in it. I don't like it. It's an uncomfortable bed where China spies on me or whatever. But that, like, I'm just thinking logically here, let's not be fucking stupid. So that's the Chinese hacker story. What else we got? Ukraine. So I don't talk a ton about Ukraine, and I have my reasons, I mean, well, I guess I should talk about my reasons. The big reason why, like, I don't talk a lot about Ukraine is that I have believed from the jump that it's an unwinnable war for Ukraine in any normal sense. And within the like MSNBC sort of Washington world, that's an extremely unpopular take. And I don't gain from putting it out there. I've said it, it's on the record, but like beating that drum, I don't get a lot out of that. You know what I mean? And despite thinking that like Ukraine cannot win in any normal sense, I've also been on the record sort of reluctantly supportive of arms to Ukraine. I've wanted other things to go along with it, like, debt relief and, policies that would strengthen Ukraine's working class. Like labor organizing has taken it on the chin in Ukraine. And in fact, there's like a lot of right-wing elements in Ukraine that are sort of benefiting from the larger context of having a war environment, So all of that's not great. But I've also like to be a person on the left who is reluctantly supportive of arms to Ukraine, but who also believes that Ukraine can't win. And I'm just looking at the balance of power here. That's just how it's going to be, and having no love for fucking Russia and having no love for an imperial power doing imperial shit. Well, no matter what I say, it's going to generate tons of antibodies, like it's going to weigh into like a very sort of rigid discourse. And I'm not a fan of saying things that like nobody's interested in hearing at all. Like if there's a constituency, even if it's a small constituency, I'll say what needs to be said. If I have to pay a price for the truth, I'll say what needs to be said. But there has to be some prospect of influence or upside or somebody else agreeing or something, and so like there's not a lot of people on the Ukraine issue who have my collection of beliefs. Maybe people on this chat, I don't know. But all of that is to say, like, it's such a like grim situation that my prescription from the start has been that the second we recognize the situation as a mutually hurting stalemate, we must negotiate a settlement even if that means Ukraine has to lose some territory. So William Zartman is this scholar who developed this concept of the mutually hurting stalemate, and he identified it as a situation that is ripe for conflict resolution, ripe for peacemaking. And the idea is simply that like a mutually hurting stalemate is when the situation is negative sum. So not win-win, not positive sum, and not win-lose where one gets but the other loses, but where it's negative sum. And so in battlefield situations where the longer the conflict plays out, the more both sides are hurt by it. So time is against both parties. That's a mutually hurting stalemate. Mutual hurting stalemates are ripe for negotiated settlement, conflict resolution. That's how you unlock peace from a war situation, is to diagnose the mutually hurting stalemate and then to act accordingly. So that's what I've been looking for. And the Russia's invasion reached the point of mutual hurting stalemate as soon as Ukraine was able to meaningfully fight back and meaningfully retake certain territories, even when it would lose those territories later. It was just the fact that it could repel Russia from parts of its territory that was sufficient to know that this was going to be a grinding war of attrition, which is what it has proved to be. And we hit that point within 3 or 4 months of Russia's invasion in 2022. Like, it was a mutual hurting stalemate way before the presidential campaign kicked off. And this is the trouble with the Ukraine heads in foreign policy, the people who are like super focused on Ukraine, because they don't want any compromise, any concessions. They want to ignore the balance of power and treat this as if it's an American proxy war almost, and it just ain't that simple. American involvement in this has to have limits. Nothing defending Ukraine is not worth it if the consequence is nuclear war, and the risk of that is manageable, but we have to keep that as a constraint in our heads. It means that this has to have limits. And then the only reasonable debate is about where the limits are, but also the condition that I had for supporting Ukraine military aid was always that there had to be an end game in mind. It can't just be endless war. It has to be providing arms with the goal of creating a mutual hurting stalemate. But like I said, we reached that point fucking almost 2 years ago. So what have we been doing since? What we've been doing since is refusing to acknowledge reality. What we've been doing since is, we're seeking moral redemption in the primacy project. We're trying to transmutate American exceptionalism onto this other situation. We're trying to use Ukraine as our theater of agony to make us feel good that we're not going back, or the unipolar moment is here to stay, or some shit like that. That American power is good after all, and that's a problematic. I think there's reasons to support Ukraine's defense on its own terms. I don't think supporting Ukraine's defense should vindicate the larger foreign policy project that kills and immiserates so many, including within America, but especially abroad. So all of that is a prelude to two pieces of news about Ukraine. One being that Biden either literally just announced or he's about to announce a $1.25 billion military aid package to Ukraine, and it's going to include a whole bunch of shit. Artillery shells, Stinger manpads, Hawk missiles, Nassams missiles. We've already been helping Ukraine mass produce drones, and the drone part of the Ukraine battlefield is something I need to talk about at a later date. And I will totally do that because it's a fascinating thing, but I don't want to get off topic. So the thing I'm So the $1.25 billion military aid package, it's a lot of money. It's not going to achieve anything. If you recognize that we're in a mutually hurting stalemate, then the package doesn't really, it's like pouring water on a fully wet sponge. You know what I mean? Like if Biden's out the door, Trump is going to inherit a situation where he's going to demand a negotiated settlement, and it's probably going to be one that's unfavorable to Ukraine. And so like the lament that the Biden people should have is that they didn't try to make a negotiated settlement happen on their watch, because they probably would not have made Ukraine eat it as much as Trump is probably going to make Ukraine eat it, and then right before the holidays, there was a USAID, Agency for International Development, announcement that I did not talk about on the podcast, but I probably should have. They basically announced Samantha Power, the genocide lover who pretends to hate genocide. She had authorized this $20 billion loan guarantee to, here's the press release, right? To Ukraine, $20 billion. And as a progressive, this is actually something that I think is I've supported. Like I've said this whole time, there is no point in providing arms to Ukraine if you're not also going to provide sovereign debt relief to Ukraine, right? You cannot just do the war part of anti-imperialism and not do the anti-capital part, or like remedying capitalist immiseration part of the imperialism you're supposed to be confronting. So this $20 billion loan guarantee is huge. It's actually like, I can't believe I didn't talk about this. The thing in my concern about it is twofold. One, it says literally, I don't know if you can see this on the screen, the loans are to be repaid with proceeds earned from immobilized Russian sovereign assets. So I don't know what the tally is on, how much we've recouped from oligarch yachts so far or whatever, but they're not getting any they're not getting $20 billion in Russian assets. Like that's just not going to happen. And so, this loan, it's probably a $20 billion gift. I almost hope it is. And that's pretty egregious considering what's happening in America right now. Like we talked about the other day, record homelessness, rent distress through the roof, there's record there. I just saw a thing yesterday in Financial Times, record credit defaults in America, or not record, going back to 2010, there hasn't been so many credit defaults, right? So basically the global financial crisis. And like all of that's happening in America at the same time that we're doing, austerity economic policies in America, and then providing this $20 billion loan to Ukraine, but it's a loan that's going to have to be gifted because the claim that we're going to recoup this in Russian assets is not realistic, and the alternative to not so if we treat this as a kind of debt forgiveness, okay, good. But what about America? There's an easy comparison here. If you're an average American, that's like, well, what about us? What about me? And the alternative that's possible, especially under a Trump administration, if, depending on how long this $20 billion loan is supposed to take to be repaid, if MAGA is in power, it is not going to be debt forgiveness. You can fucking believe that shit, right? It's going to be making Ukraine debt slaves to the West. They're going to owe, and they're going to have to eat austerity for a long time to repay it in the same way that the global South has to. Like this makes this $20 billion loan is either going to come at the expense of spending this money in America, or it's going to make Ukraine feel the pain that the rest of the global South tends to face, and that's bad either way. It's a tough situation, and then the 1.25 billion in arms, it's like, okay, I mean, I guess this is a giveaway to American defense contractors, but like it's a failure to recognize that getting to peace, getting to settlement starts from a mutual hurting stalemate, and that condition already exists, and Trump is going to reap the benefits of that because he's the one who's going to preside over the sort of pausing or termination of the war. And that's fucked. And so once again, it's like Democrats and foreign policy mandarins, they're basically like the world's worst politicians. Like they fucking continuously don't get it. Hey, I will try to become an affiliate once I can. I appreciate the sentiments from everybody though, like it will happen at some point. I sure hope so. Yeah, I haven't been doing the Twitch thing long, so we'll see. The one thing I wanted to point out on Ukraine, closing out on this topic, there was a MAGA Twitter account that shared a little video critiquing this $1 billion aid package to Ukraine. And I don't believe the MAGA shit. I'm like, I have problems with this, but I want to share it because it's like, it shows something. It shows a political messaging thing that is hard to trump, if you will, right? Okay, so this MAGA account you get the picture, right? It's not even clear to me that this video is actually in America, but it illustrates a point, a propaganda point that is irrefutable, right? Like, look what she's saying. Biden sending $1.25 billion more to Ukraine with a consideration of another $1.25 billion before January 20th. Meanwhile, here in America, and then it cuts to that clip, right? So that's the kind of messaging that is like low-hanging fruit, because it's speaking to something true. Now, what do they want to do with it? They want to create a, white supremacist patriarchal society and turn to, imperialism and Monroe Doctrine 2.0 and, World War III with China. Like they want to do all kinds of heinous shit, a war on sanctuary cities. But where they want to take this energy is, of course, a dark nightmare. But the critique that is the foundation of where they want to go. The critique speaks truth, right? If you really value American support to Ukraine, whether it's that ginormous loan or the military aid or both, you cannot sustainably do that if you fucking ignore the real problems, the mass problems experienced, the economic insecurity experienced in America. It is obvious that our approach to Ukraine is politically unsustainable. And it was obvious from the second MAGA decided to politicize aid to Ukraine. As soon as that happened, the game was over. It meant that the way that we are supporting Ukraine was going to be unsustainable because we don't do a commensurate level of support to Americans themselves. That's fucked, So we give our enemies this low-hanging fruit messaging. So that's Ukraine. That's my piece on Ukraine. There's two related things on North Korea stuff, and like as some people probably know, North Korea, this is like where I started my career as like a specialist of this stuff. And my first two books were about U.S.-North Korea relations during the North Korea nuclear crisis in 2018. Like that's when I got my 5 minutes of fame or whatever, like I was separate conversation, but like I was like all over media for a while, and I got a book out of it. But anyway, two North Korea news items, although one of them is about South Korea. But the first is that there's a New York Times op-ed by, let me pull it up here. Here we go. Trump Kim Part 2 could shake up the world. New York Times op-ed by Dmitry Alperovich and Sergei Radchenko. Sergei is, I don't know him personally. He's a like very solid historian of the Cold War. Like he knows his stuff. I don't know his politics, but him pairing up with Dmitry Alperovich gives me pause about what his politics might be. Dmitry, for people who don't know, is a uber hawk on China. Like he's one of the World War III guys, like big time. And so it's kind of notable that he would be co-authoring an op-ed, interestingly, in like the newspaper of record or whatever, arguing for a kind of rapprochement détente with North Korea. And what they argue in the piece is basically like, let's do more summit diplomacy with North Korea. But what they accept is that we need to be providing some measure of sanctions relief to North Korea. We ought to normalize diplomatic relations with North Korea. And we ought to try and get to peace. Yes. Declare a peace treaty, declare peace and then sign a peace treaty, right? The Korean War has been, frozen this whole time. This is not a new argument. Sergei probably is well aware that not just me, but like lots of people have been arguing, especially in the 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe, whenever Trump was first doing the summits with Kim Jong-un, basically like everybody was arguing for, all the sane people were arguing for some package of like diplomatic normalization and sanctions relief and peace treaty. And like my personal critique of Trump during that time, I think sometimes I got misinterpreted by people, but like I was opposed to the way Trump was doing the summit diplomacy. I was not opposed to summit diplomacy per se. I was not opposed to negotiations for sure. I was a big fan of negotiations, but I had argued from the beginning that like, you're not going to get North Korea to do anything meaningful to bridle its nuclear capabilities if you don't provide it material incentives, like real material incentives that offset the risks that it's taking in effectively weakening itself. You know what I mean? And so that, and the thing that they're demanding above all is sanctions relief. And it just so happens that our sanctions regime on North Korea has brutalized the North Korean people. Like, yes, the regime itself is probably brutalizes its people, but does that give us a right to also brutalize its people? Fucking no. So like, again, to critique US policy or to critique the US is not to validate or vindicate the other guys. Like everybody's doing bad shit. All of our governments seemingly are doing bad shit. You know what I mean? And so my solution was like, if you want material concessions from North Korea, you have to put material things on the table that are of commensurate value or greater value, right? Sanctions relief is clearly the starting point for that. So this argument in the New York Times is, there's not one word in it that's new, except about the terms of like making peace with North Korea. And I support all that, right? The thing that's new in this piece is an idea that I had in 2019 that I shelved. I didn't want to speak it out loud because when I thought about it, it seemed pretty grim. And which is that like, and this is why it matters who's writing this op-ed. So Dmitry Alperovich, again, like if we're talking about Uber hawks, right? Why would an Uber hawk on China be for peace with North Korea? Well, in the piece, they more or less make it clear that if we befriend North Korea, we create a kind of enemy or an antagonist on China's border. Like we can use the North Korea card against China in a way. You know what I mean? And we can give North Korea options to rely less on China. North Koreans and Chinese do not get along already. The two governments, they're like strategically aligned, but very reluctantly. Like they fucking distrust each other. They don't like each other. So the idea of flipping North Korea to be kind of on our side on the chessboard was something that I had contemplated seriously, and behind closed doors, I had actually advocated that. I just had not advocated it publicly. And I think there's a kind of Kissingerian cleverness to that. The problem that I have why I didn't go public with this is if you're making peace in Korea in order to heighten rivalry with China and geopolitical competition, you're subordinating peace in Korea to a larger conflict. And Korea needs peace on its own terms, first of all, but also that means everybody is going to end up being worse off. And the ultimate nightmare in foreign policy that subsumes all other nightmares is great power rivalry. That's the thing we have to unfuck above all else, you know? So I don't know. We got to do it. And we're not going to do that if we're making peace in North Korea with North Korea as a way to get there. So people are like, some people are cheering this op-ed, other people are critiquing it. I'm sympathetic to it, but I don't think it's new, except that I think there's a newly available logic of using North Korea against China. And I think that's probably correct, but I don't think that's a good thing to do. You know, I think doing that means we're probably not going to pursue a new détente with China, and the world needs a Sino-US détente, kind of like more than ever, you know. There's also some like small issues that the New York Times piece doesn't mention that needs to be sort of dealt with, you know, like what about US troop presence? What is an acceptable nuclear concession from North Korea? You know, to what extent does this relate to South Korea going nuclear or not? You know, there's some like wicked triangular problems in that. And the piece doesn't really address fucking any of that. And that segues to the final thing that I wanted to share here. So it's very, very tragically related. So this is very new. So I think if you're on the Foreign Affairs magazine, like distro list, I've written for Foreign Affairs a bunch of times. So they send me pre-releases and I don't of articles, essays that are gonna come out. And I don't know if that's because I'm special boy or if it's just what they do to everybody on their distro list. But either way, they've got this piece that's about to drop. And it's called Why South Korea Should Go Nuclear. The bomb is the best way to contain the threat from the North. This is so fucked. This is such a fucked opinion. And the tragedy of this is that it's written by Robert Kelly and Min-Hyung Kim. I don't know Min-Hyung, but Bob Kelly is a like longtime friend of mine. You know, I made a documentary that had him featured in it, and we've hung out before. Like he's a friend, but he's writing this piece, and apparently we clearly disagree based on the title, you know. But what I want to read is just one paragraph from this essay, very controversial, and it intersects with this whole question of like North Korea summit diplomacy and a peace treaty, and like if we're trying to reduce North Korean nuclear weapons, you know. So Bob Kelly, Min-Hyung Kim, in this piece, they say the biggest obstacle to South Korean nuclearization is not a domestic constituency, but a foreign one, the United States. There is a deep, decades-old bipartisan opposition in Washington to nuclear proliferation, even among U.S. allies. American opponents of South Korean nuclearization, though, exaggerate the policy's downsides. They underappreciate its benefits, and they ignore that the United States' own liberal values call for Washington to tolerate a democratic partner's national security choices, even when it dislikes them. That's the gist of the piece. I think that's like really tragically fucked. They're making a logical argument, but again, it's only a logical argument. This goes back to the Eisenhower defense industrial speech thing that I was talking about earlier. It's only a logical argument if you have no pretense to hoping for or aspiring to disarmament. Like you've given up even on arms control, which itself was usually a compromise, way of deflecting from disarmament, And so we've accepted the wrong premises here. And South Korea going nuclear is super fucked. The thing is, the reason why this intersects with the summit diplomacy stuff. So I've written publicly, South Korean should not go nuclear. I've been very clear about that. Toby Dalton and I who works at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We wrote an essay in Global Asia magazine like a year ago, I think, about this. So maybe I'll put it in the show notes. But anyways, the South Korea should not go nuclear. There's all kinds of like strategic reasons and political reasons and moral reasons why that's the case. But the thing that like troubles me here is that if South Korea goes nuclear, there is no chance whatsoever that we're going to get nuclear concessions from North Korea. None. There's a good chance we'll get nuclear concessions from North Korea if we do summit diplomacy, diplomatic normalization, if we reduce our troop presence in Korea, if we offer sanctions relief, if we come at them with a package of shit that says, we would like to relate to you differently than we have in the past. We've shat the bed for 40 years and we'd like to fix that. If that's how we came at North Korea, we could get meaningful nuclear concessions from North Korea. But if we're letting South Korea go nuclear, North Korea is just going to arms race. They're going to try to maintain nuclear superiority. And I cannot think of anything more volatile than an inter-Korean nuclear arms race, and there would be no excuse to have an alliance with South Korea in that context. We should not have South Korea as an ally if they are going to go nuclear and we're going to accept a nuclear arms race on the Korean Peninsula. Fuck that. There's no point to it. We shouldn't be a party to it. You know what I mean? So, will South Korea go nuclear? I don't know. It seems like it's a bit overdetermined at this point, But should they? Fuck no. It's not good for their security. It's not good for the Asian peace. It's not good for the U.S. It's certainly not good for the Korean people. So hopefully better angels prevail. But I got to say, it should be fucking obvious. But the idea of the New York Times op-ed, the summit diplomacy, we should normalize diplomatic relations with North Korea to counter China. That's not possible if we're going to let South Korea go nuclear. So we're going to have to figure out our priorities here, So that's all I got. That's today. I don't know. Can I try to raid somebody? I tried last time and it didn't fucking work. But un-diplomatic.com if you want to support the show, or if you can somehow magically get me more followers on Twitch, then I can start having subs on the channel. That would be fucking awesome. But yeah, I don't know who's live now. Let me see. I would like to try to raid somebody. maybe I can committee. Let me see. I don't know if this will actually work. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to work. Once again. Let me see. Beautiful. All right. Well, I'll catch y'all's later. Central Committee. Here we go. Yeah, boy. God damn it.